Alberta, which is just outside of Calgary. I'd like to invite everyone to visit my website at quilterspalette.ca, and there you'll be able to find any upcoming barn quilting classes and shows that we will be at, and also of course the supplies that we will ship anywhere within Canada. I'd like to thank everyone for following me on YouTube and social media, and for taking the time to watch my last video. In that video, we created a grid with 64 squares by dividing the board 3 times. We first divided it into 4 equal squares, and then each of those 4 into 4 more, creating 16 squares. And then each of those got divided again into 4 squares to create 64. The 64 square grid will help you draw many block patterns. I would say the 16 squares and the 64 squares are the most common. Now, I did mention in that video that there would be a second one to cover other size grids. So today I'll be introducing you to a great tool that will aid you in drawing grids in keeping with the theme of no math and no measuring. Now, from that last video, a couple questions did come up. A couple people asked me what type of highlighter I use. I generally use Bic or Sharpies. I have tried others. They're just, some of them actually bled through the paint. These ones have been really good. The paint just kind of sucks it up. You don't even see it. You can also wash them off, wipe them off. Most of it will come off. And I've never had these brands interfere with the painting. The other thing that came up was a question about whether the board needs to be square. So now, you're best to deal with a board that is square in terms of a 90-degree angle at the corners, but your sides don't necessarily need to be equal. So say, for example, you had 2 sides that were, I don't know, let's say 22 3/4 inches, but the opposing sides were 23 1/4. You could still use this method. It'll still work out, because that's the great thing about dividing it up this way. It will divide the inconsistencies consistently across the board. One of the other questions was how to do a border. So that's actually one of the things I'm going to show you today, how to add a border and do the grid within that border. The other thing that I'll cover in today's video is how to draw a grid on a diagonal. Because sometimes, I'll just step out of the way here for a moment, you may have a pattern that you'd like to put on point or on the diagonal. So I'll show you how to do that as well. And then of course the final thing that I'll be covering is how to do grids that are less common. So ones that are, let's say 5 across, 10 across, 6. I'll show you a couple different combinations so you get an idea of how you can figure them out. All right, so I'll just reconfigure the camera setup here and I'll be right back. To show you how to add a border, or basically it's drawing a grid within a border. So I generally start by drawing the border, and your border can be any size. On this one I'm going to do a 16 grid. So that was in my earlier video as well. It's pretty straightforward, and it can be done, as I said, in any size square. So it really doesn't matter how big your border is and what size your inside square ends up being. For the purpose of this demonstration, just to keep it easy, I'm just going to make the border the width of the yardstick. I'm going to draw this in pencil. Don't know if you'll be able to see that or not. Oh yeah, it should be not too bad. And then I'll do the grid in green like I did on the previous one as well. So what I'm doing is just putting the edge right along the edge of the ruler along the edge of the board, so that it will be consistently the same width all the way around. And of course, if you were, let's say you wanted a 2-inch border, because maybe you had some corner motif that was 2 inches wide that you wanted to add, then of course you just measure in 2 inches on all sides, and whatever's left in the middle, that's your grid area. All right, so it starts like the others. I mean, it's identical actually. It's just you're working within a different space. So instead of working with the outer edge of the board, we're working within the border parameters. Now, for the diagonal lines to find the middle, you're actually pretty much doing the same thing because you are going from corner to corner. And because this corner is equal distance in, you're still going corner to corner. Now, you might notice that I have my ruler a little bit away from the crosshatch, and that's because of the highlighter. It's got a bit of a wider edge to it. It's not a sharp point like the pencil. So we will go over to that corner, and then this way as well. And then with the T-square, we will find the cross marks. And these, you can, again, go all the way to the edge if you want, but if you think it's going to confuse you, then just start at the border and go across to the other border. And this way as well. So, as you can see, this is exactly how we did the other one. It's just we're going within different parameters. Now, where it changes is this next step. So in the earlier videos when we were gridding the entire board, when we went to find the middle of this square, we went from the edge of the board where the line intersects the edge of the board. Now, because we're dealing with a different square, a slightly smaller one because we've cropped it from all sides, we're going to match up these 2 points. So where the cross hatches meet the border, and then that will give us the middle of this one. And again, I'm just going to back it off a little bit because of the width of my highlighter. So we'll just mark the center point. We're just going to do a 16 grid on this. So we're just going to go around basically once. And again, just start at your border, go through that intersection. It will create this secondary intersection, which you can then use to draw this line. And of course, you can use that initial one to draw the up and down on here. Turn it around so I can see it a little better. The last one going across here. Okay, on this you're going to see that there is, it didn't quite line up. I hope you can see that. Maybe I'll try and zoom in on it. This happens partly because of that width of the marker, and if you're not going quite corner to corner, if you're off a little bit, then it'll be skewed like this. Don't worry about it. When you draw your pattern, use that middle point, not where it crosses here, but right in where all 3 of them dissect, right there. And when you're drawing your lines for your pattern, that won't even be noticeable. All right, so now you can see you've got your 16 equal squares within your border. So you'll draw your border, or sorry, paint your border around the outer side, but your pattern will be on this grid within the border. If you needed 64, obviously you could cross hatch it again one more time to get your 64 squares. All right, so in this segment, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of tools that I use for drawing the less common grids. So as I mentioned earlier, the 8x8, 4x4, whether you have 16 or 64 squares, they tend to be the more common ones, especially when you're starting out. Those are the easy blocks to work with. But you will find that there's designs that are maybe 5x5, 10x10, 6x6, so on. So when I first went looking for a simpler method for my students to use, this was what I tried initially. It is a seamstress gauge, which is generally used for buttonhole placement. However, what I found with this gauge, it actually doesn't necessarily remain consistent. So you can actually have 3 or 4 spread out of, you know, the equal distance, but then this one, they're crammed together. So they don't uniformly pull one another, and they have no locking mechanism as well. So once you lift it up, if you've moved it a little bit, you've lost your gauge. So I show that just so that people realize that it may work, but it might not be ideal. So that led me to this, which is called an equidistance or equidistance tool, and it's used in woodworking. It's a little bit stiffer, and it does have these locking mechanisms. So you can loosen them and lock them up as well. So today I'm going to demonstrate to you drawing the grid for a 10 by 10. And you start out exactly as you did with the other grid. We're going to find the middle of the board so that we can find the middle of each edge. And I'm actually going to, today I'm going to do that with pencil. I'm not going to put highlighter all the way across because we don't need those lines necessarily. So we're going to find the middle first with doing our diagonal. So you may not be able to see these pencil marks. I'm just going to do a little bit of a line here that I know is kind of in the middle, and then I'll do another one this way. And just where it intersects. And then with our T-square, we're going to square it up with the edge of our board, and with the intersecting that, the middle that we just created there, and we're just going to mark one edge of the board that way and this way. So again, it's squared up. All right. Now let's backtrack a little bit here. So if you were doing 5 by 5, you wouldn't need to find the middle. You would just extend this as far as it goes. It actually has 6 slots. So you would extend it so that one slot was completely off the board and the other one was there. It does reach that far. I'm not going to do it because it can be a bit challenging to get it back together, because that is the full extent of it. Is 24 inches between these two. It actually goes a little bit further, obviously, with the 6th one. So so that'd be fine for 5. However, if you want to do 10, we need 5 on either side. So what we're going to do is I'm going to lay this down. And these notches is what we're paying attention to. And then this tip I'm putting at the edge of the board so that all my markings will be in the same place. So this first notch goes at the very edge of the board. And then you pull this over, and we're going to do 5. Remember, we're doing 10, so 5 on either side. So I need to pull this one till it lines up with that line. And I do apologize if my head gets in the way here. All right, I'm just going to tighten this one down. Just double check things here. That's lined up with the edge, and that's lined up there. So then we're just going to mark right in that corner of each of these little notches. And that's our middle one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces now. So then we'll just slide the ruler over, and we'll do it on this side as well. So lining this up with the edge of the board. I hope you can see that on the camera. You may need to zoom in. And then this is lined up with the middle. Oops. There we go. So again, we mark off right inside that notch. All right, so this will give us our 10 equal squares along this side. And now we want to do it on the opposite side as well. Or I guess not the opposite, what would that be? So we'll line this up. Okay, I think my ruler, oh yes, it did move. Okay, so I didn't lock this one. So even though it's locked, it does move a little bit. And I knew that because my edge wasn't lining up with that center part. So again, align them with the edge of the board and the middle, and then you can draw your little, where these notches are. Okay, and then we'll move it over to this side and do the same thing. All right. So we've got it at basically an L shape. This side is marked and this side is marked. And then we're going to use our T-square to draw our straight lines. And we only need to mark the one side because since we are using a T-square, we know that the line will be straight across. You'll find if you're using highlighters a fair amount, they start to look like this, which doesn't give you a very fine point. And they do wear out quicker on this than paper, obviously, because you've got a primed board. So in case you can't see it, what I'm doing is lining up this edge of the ruler with that mark that we made from the notch in the tool in order to draw these cross lines. And it doesn't matter which way you hold your T-square. So for example, I could use it this way as well and line up this end with the mark. So long as this remains square against the edge, that's the key part. Okay, and as you can probably see there, that last one I did underhanded is not straight. Can you see how wonky that is? So let's correct that. I think because I've got the board up on my Lazy Susan, the ruler flipped underneath. So there you go. So this you can actually erase with water. It'll come off with water. All right, so we'll just continue. Now we're going to use the markings from the other side to draw the other ones. So in this demonstration, just so you know, I am using a piece of ACM, aluminum composite material, and it is thinner than MDO. So that's why I have it up on my Lazy Susan, so that the ruler, because the ruler is actually thicker than the board, this part here that grabs the edge of the board is thicker. So if I have it on the table, it's not quite, it's not stable. It's lifted up higher, which causes an issue. The other thing I find with ACM, it's quite often your boards are truer than MDO because you don't lose as much with the MDO, as I explained. When every time they make a cut, you lose a bit of the board with the kerf of the blade. ACM or aluminum isn't like that. And I'm just going to quickly show you here. I'm just going to get a bit of water on a cloth. And just show you that the highlighter comes off quite easily. You don't need to remove it because you can paint right over top of it as well. So it does come off. So don't worry about making mistakes. You can erase it and start again. Yeah. All right. So feel free to pop me any questions either in the comment section, or you can pop me an email as well. That works too. Thank you. All right, so in this segment, I'm going to show you how to place your design basically in the middle on a diagonal. And we start out like we did with the other methods, in that we find the center of our board. By making our two diagonal lines. And then from there, we need to know where the middle of each side is. So we'll line our ruler up. I'm just going to push it over the edge so that ruler line's flat and intersects with there. And we're just going to mark the outer points, the edge, where the middle is. Likewise with this direction, I'm going to turn it and drop my ruler off the edge. All right, so from there, we're now going to draw our square, but it'll be on point. So we're going to go from each of those marked corners, or sorry, edges. They will become the corners for our grid. So you do all 4 edges. So we now have a new square, and it's already divided into 4 quadrants. And so we'll continue to break each of these down into 4, or in the case of this one, I'm actually going to show you breaking it down into 5 using that the equidistance tool. So I think I've shown the dividing to 8 and 16 enough times that you understand that concept. So what you'll do is same idea as what we were doing before, with it lined up against the edge of the board. Make sure those are loosened off. We want 5 by 5, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to take it a little further till they're both on the lines. And you can, if you want, you can actually put this up here as well, but I like to have it a little bit down with the points at the edge so that I can see, see where they're situated. So we'll just mark there, 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 and there. And then we'll turn it. And hopefully I can go over this edge without putting my head in the way of the camera for you. All right, so I hope you can see that. So this little notch is right on the line. That one's on the line, and then we create an additional point in between the ones in between. So now, this is typically, if you were doing the full board, this is where you would use your T-square. However, now there's nothing to butt it up against to get that nice right angle. So this is where I like to use my quilting ruler. You could also use a carpenter's square. So you would take it and line this edge of the ruler up with that line, bring it up to that notch that you've marked, and draw a line across. Now, as I do like to use my quilting ruler because it allows me to see right through, and I can, rather than trying to line up the edge, I can actually line up the crosshatch marks. So as you can see, I'm lining it up there, bringing it up to that dot that we've drawn, making sure it's perpendicular. So now we've drawn these diagonals to find the middle. It actually turns out to be an extra line, which we can take out after. And with highlighter, you can remove that with just a damp cloth. And so I'm just drawing the grid within that square. And I hope you can see how I'm lining up the line with the grid on the ruler. So you can see the line coming out either end and then going up to that dot. All right, so now we have a grid that's 5 by 5, but as you can see, it still has that extra diagonal line in it. I'm just going to get cloth a little wet here, just to show you that you can just take it off. Some highlighters come off a little bit easier than others. You can also spritz it with water too. All right, so there you go. So it's 5 by 5, and then you can draw out your pattern. When you're doing this, you can also add a border. The way you would do that is find your edge like we did, how we started out, but then draw your border. Let's say your border was here. You draw your border inside of this line, and then your grid will be smaller again. It'll be inside that new border. That's exactly what I did on this one that I showed you earlier. I found my corners, or so the edges, at each middle point, and then I drew the border and then drew my grid inside that border. All right, I hope you've enjoyed my videos and that they've maybe helped you out. Maybe take away a pinch point or a pain point that you've had in getting started with barn quilt painting, and that you go on to make all kinds of barn quilts. All right.